Stephen adjusted the strap of his backpack, his heart pounding with nervous excitement as he approached the towering dormitory building. Its smooth, metallic surface gleamed under the twin suns, one golden, the other a pale blue. University life on Earth Colony Delta 7 was finally beginning, and Stephen was ready to dive into the adventure. After months of anticipation, he'd been accepted into one of the most prestigious intergalactic programs. Studying alongside aliens was part of the appeal, but he hadn't expected his journey to take this kind of twist. Stephen Carter? The receptionist's voice broke his thoughts. She was human, but her eyes had a faint luminescent hue, a common genetic tweak for off-world staff. She glanced at the holographic roster in front of her, her expression faltering. "Ah yes, room 38. Stephen smiled nervously. "That's me." "Well," the receptionist hesitated, her tone suddenly more cautious. "There's been a special accommodation. You'll be rooming with one of our visiting students from Sector 14. It's a unique arrangement." "Unique?" Stephen frowned. "How so?" "Just keep an open mind," she said with a tight-lipped smile, sliding him a crystalline keycard. "And don't hesitate to report any unusual behavior." Stephen felt a chill run down his spine. He shrugged it off, thanking her before making his way to the dorms. The sterile, white hallways hummed faintly with the sound of automated cleaners. He arrived at room 38, the lock glowing as it scanned his keycard. The door hissed open. The room was dimly lit, but he immediately noticed the contrast. His side was bare, awaiting his unpacking, while the other was filled with strange artifacts. Glowing orbs suspended midair, a sleek case humming softly as if alive, and a tangle of wires sprouting crystalline flowers. But his attention locked on the figure by the window. She turned and Stephen froze. She wasn't human. Her skin shimmered in shades of silvery blue, faint bioluminescent patterns rippling across it. Her hair cascaded in shimmering tendrils like liquid starlight. But it was her eyes, large, luminous, and violet, that locked him in place. They seemed to see through him, studying him with an intensity that made his heart skip a beat. "You must be Stephen," she said, her voice melodic yet otherworldly, carrying an echo as if spoken across dimensions. "I am Kari." He blinked, trying to process the moment. Yeah, Stephen. That's me." "I apologize for the abrupt introduction," she said, her gaze steady. "Sharing quarters is not customary where I am from, but I will adapt." Stephen found himself nodding dumbly, his mind spinning. He had known aliens attended this university, but being assigned a room with one, let alone someone as captivating and surreal as Kari, was overwhelming. "Yes, sure. Adapt. Of course." Her lips curved in what he thought might be a smile. "I hope we can coexist peacefully. I am here to learn from humans. After all." The day passed in a haze of awkward introductions and mundane unpacking. Kari was polite but distant, her focus primarily on her strange devices and books. Stephen found himself watching her when she wasn't looking, fascinated by her delicate, fluid movements and the soft glow her skin emitted in the darkened room. By nightfall, they had established an unspoken rhythm. Stephen sticking to his bed, Kari to hers, both pretending not to notice the other. Exhausted, Stephen drifted into a restless sleep. He woke abruptly, a faint hum filling the room. Disoriented, he blinked in the darkness, realizing something, or someone, was hovering above him. "Kari," he croaked, his voice barely a whisper. Her glowing violet eyes locked onto his, inches away. She was crouched over him, her silvery blue skin faintly illuminated. Stephen's breath caught. She looked desperate. "I need your help," she said softly, her voice trembling. "What?" His heart pounded. "What's going on?" I did not wish to involve you," she admitted, glancing toward the window as if expecting someone, or something, to appear. "But I have no choice." Her hands, delicate, almost translucent, pressed against his chest. Stephen's pulse raced as a faint warmth spread from her touch. "You are compatible." "Compatible for what?" he stammered. Before she could answer, the room shook. A low, guttural sound reverberated through the walls, like a distant roar. Kari's expression hardened, her glowing patterns intensifying. She jumped back, her hand outstretched as a blade of light materialized in her palm. "They've found me," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "I need you to trust me, Stephen. We must leave. Now." "What? Who's after you?" Stephen scrambled out of bed, adrenaline surging. Kari didn't answer immediately, her focus on the door as the sound of heavy footsteps grew louder. Finally, she turned to him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and determination. "I'm not just a student here," she admitted. "I'm a fugitive." The door burst open before Stephen could process her words. A hulking figure stepped inside, its body encased in dark, chitinous armor, eyes glowing red. It let out a mechanical snarl, advancing toward Kari. Stephen barely had time to react as Kari shoved him aside, her light blade clashing with the intruder's weapon in a blinding explosion of sparks. "Run!" she shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "I'll explain everything later." But Stephen didn't run. Instead, he grabbed the nearest object, a glowing orb from her desk, and hurled it at the attacker. The orb detonated on impact, sending the creature staggering. Kari looked at him, startled. For the first time, he saw something new in her eyes, respect. "Maybe I chose well," she said with a faint smile, before grabbing his hand. "Come, Stephen. If we survive this, I'll tell you everything." Stephen's heart thundered in his chest as Kari pulled him through the narrow dormitory hallway. The dim lighting flickered, shadows dancing against the walls as distant alarms began to blare. Whatever was after her, it wasn't subtle, and now it was after both of them. "What are they?" Stephen asked breathlessly as they sprinted down the corridor. Kari glanced back, her violet eyes glowing faintly. "They're called Sentinels. Biosynthetic hunters. They're designed to track and retrieve fugitives like me." "Fugitives?" Stephen stumbled over the word, nearly tripping over his own feet. "I thought you were here to study human culture." Kari tightened her grip on his hand, her expression grim. "I am. That wasn't a lie. But my presence here isn't entirely sanctioned." They rounded a corner just as the Sentinel burst through the door of their room, its glowing red eyes scanning the hallway. It let out a metallic snarl, the sound ricocheting off the walls. Kari raised her free hand, a holographic map materializing in the air. She scanned it quickly, her fingers darting over the projection. "This way," she said, yanking him toward the emergency exit. Wait. Can we back up for a second?" Stephen panted. "What did you mean by not sanctioned? And why are they chasing you?" "I'll explain when we're safe," she snapped, glancing over her shoulder. The Sentinel was gaining on them, its heavy footsteps pounding like thunder. "For now, just trust me." Stephen gritted his teeth, but said nothing. Trust her? Sure. Why not? She only had glowing skin, a light blade, and a homicidal robot chasing her. No big deal. The emergency stairwell echoed with the sound of their footfalls as they descended. Kari moved with inhuman grace, her shimmering hair trailing behind her like a comet's tail. Stephen, on the other hand, was barely holding it together, his lungs burning with every step. "Almost there," Kari said, her voice calm despite the chaos. The door at the bottom of the stairwell exploded inward just as they reached it. A second Sentinel emerged, its black armor glinting under the emergency lights. It raised an arm, a pulsating energy cannon charging with a menacing hum. Kari reacted instantly. She thrust Stephen behind her, her light blade flaring to life as she deflected the blast. The energy ricocheted off the blade, searing a hole into the wall. Kari lunged forward, her movements fluid and precise, striking the Sentinel with a flurry of blows. Sparks erupted as her blade cut through its armor, but the machine was relentless. Stephen's mind raced. He looked around, desperate for something, anything that could help. His eyes landed on a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. Without thinking, he grabbed it, yanked out the pin, and sprayed the Sentinel with a blinding cloud of foam. The machine faltered, its sensors obscured. Kari seized the moment, driving her blade into its core. The Sentinel let out a distorted screech before collapsing in a heap of smoldering metal. Kari turned to Stephen, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. Impressive, she said, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. For a human, Stephen managed a weak laugh, still clutching the extinguisher like a lifeline. Yeah, well, desperation's a great motivator. Kari led him out of the building and into the campus courtyard, which was eerily empty. The night air was cool, the twin moons casting long shadows across the grounds. She glanced around, her bioluminescent patterns dimming slightly as she tapped into a small device on her wrist. "We can't stay here," she said. "The Sentinels will keep coming." "Great. So where do we go?" Stephen asked, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Because I'm guessing campus security isn't equipped to deal with alien murder bots." Kari shot him a look. "Follow me." She guided him to an unassuming maintenance shed on the edge of the campus. Inside, she activated a hidden panel, and the floor shifted, revealing a narrow tunnel that descended into darkness. "What is this?" Stephen asked, staring at the passage in disbelief. "An emergency route," Kari explained. "My people built it when we first established contact with your university. It leads to a safe house." Stephen hesitated. "And by safe house, you mean?" "A place where the Sentinels can't follow." Her tone was firm. "It's our only chance." Stephen glanced back toward the campus, the faint glow of the Sentinels' searchlights cutting through the night. He took a deep breath. "Fine, let's go." The tunnel stretched on for what felt like miles, the walls glowing faintly with an organic, bioluminescent light. Stephen's curiosity finally got the better of him. "Okay," he said, "we're safe, at least for now. So start talking. Why are those things after you?" Kari slowed, her expression unreadable. She stopped and turned to face him, her violet eyes meeting his. "Because I stole something," she admitted. "Something they want back." Stephen's stomach dropped. "You what?" "It's called a Genesis core," Kari said, her voice low. "It's a device capable of generating limitless energy. My people created it to sustain our dying world. But the leaders of my colony, they want to weaponize it. I couldn't let that happen. So you stole it?" Stephen asked, his mind reeling. Kari nodded. "I brought it here hoping to hide it on Earth. But the Sentinels found me sooner than I anticipated." Stephen ran a hand through his hair. "This is insane. You're telling me you have some super-powered alien tech hidden away somewhere." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, glowing orb. It pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. "Not somewhere," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Here?" Stephen stared at the orb, his mind racing. The Genesis core. A device so powerful it could either save or destroy an entire planet. And it was sitting in the palm of his roommate's hand. "I didn't want to involve you," Kari said, her voice tinged with guilt. "But now that the Sentinels know you're with me, they won't stop until they have it." Stephen let out a shaky laugh. "Well, that's just great. First week of university, and I'm already on an intergalactic hit list." Kari stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I'll protect you, Stephen. I promise." He met her eyes, a strange sense of calm washing over him despite the chaos. "Then I guess we're in this together." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Yes, together." The faint hum of the Genesis core filled the tunnel, casting soft ripples of light that danced across the bioluminescent walls. Stephen's mind whirled as he stared at the glowing orb in Kari's hand. He wanted to question everything: how it worked, why she trusted him, and most of all, how they were going to survive. But the look in her violet eyes stopped him. She wasn't just scared. She was determined. They pressed on through the tunnel in silence until they reached a circular chamber at the end. The walls here were smoother, marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and shimmer in the dim light. Kari placed her hand on the wall, and a portion of it slid away, revealing a concealed room. The safe house was small but filled with technology that looked centuries ahead of anything Stephen had ever seen. Panels on the walls pulsed faintly, emitting a calming blue light. A sleek console with holographic displays sat at the center, surrounded by floating orbs that hovered like silent sentinels. A small alcove held what looked like a bed, though it was more of a glowing cocoon suspended in midair. Kari moved to the console, her fingers dancing over the controls. Symbols and diagrams lit up around her as she worked. Stephen watched in awe, finally breaking the silence. So, this is your version of a dorm room? Kari glanced at him, a flicker of amusement in her expression. It's a temporary refuge, designed for emergencies. She paused, her tone softening. I'm sorry, Stephen. I never meant for you to be caught up in this. Stephen leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. Yeah, well, I didn't exactly plan on rooming with an alien fugitive either. But here we are. He exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing slightly. Look, I'm in this now, whether I like it or not. So, what's the plan? Kari hesitated, her gaze dropping to the Genesis core still glowing faintly in her hand. The plan was to hide the core here on Earth until I could find allies willing to stand against my colony's leaders. But now that the Sentinels have tracked me, the odds of success have diminished significantly. Stephen frowned. So what? You're just going to give up? Her head snapped up, her eyes flashing with defiance. No, I'll never give up, but I must adapt. If the Sentinels take the core, countless lives on my world and yours could be lost. That's not a risk I'm willing to take. Stephen stepped closer, his voice steady. Then let me help. Kari blinked, clearly taken aback. Stephen, this isn't your fight. It is now, he said, his tone firm. You said it yourself. They know I'm involved. If they're coming after me anyway, I might as well do something useful. For a moment, Kari studied him, her expression unreadable. Then, to his surprise, she smiled. A small, genuine smile that made her otherworldly beauty even more striking. Very well, but if you're going to help, you'll need to be prepared. The next few hours passed in a blur as Kari introduced Stephen to her world's technology. She showed him how to manipulate holographic interfaces, operate small drones, and even use a handheld energy shield. Stephen was a quick learner, though his clumsy attempts at first drew more than a few laughs from Kari. You're getting there, she said, her voice light with amusement as she watched him struggle to activate the shield without accidentally shocking himself. Yeah, well, we humans don't exactly grow up with energy shields, Stephen muttered, glaring at the device as it finally hummed to life. He looked up at her, a mischievous glint in his eye. But I'll get the hang of it. You're not the only one who can adapt. Kari's expression softened, a mix of admiration and gratitude flickering across her face. I don't doubt it. As the night wore on, they began piecing together a plan. Kari explained that the Sentinels weren't just mindless machines. They were connected to a hive network, directed by an overseer that controlled their every move. If they could disable the overseer, the Sentinels would be rendered useless, at least temporarily. The overseer's signal originates from a hidden relay, Kari said, bringing up a holographic map. She pointed to a glowing point just outside the city. If we destroy it, we'll have a chance to relocate the core without being tracked. Stephen nodded, his heart pounding. Okay, so we sneak in, blow up the relay, and get out before the Sentinels realize what's happening. Easy. Kari raised an eyebrow. It will be anything but easy. The relay will be heavily guarded. Yeah, I figured, Stephen said with a wry grin. But I've got you, right? Her expression softened again, and she gave a small nod. Yes. You have me? They settled in to rest before the mission, the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on them. Stephen lay on the floor, staring up at the softly glowing ceiling. Kari sat cross-legged nearby, the Genesis core floating between her hands as she seemed to meditate. Hey, Kari, Stephen said after a long silence. Yes? You've talked about your world and your people, but what about you? What made you decide to come here? To risk everything for this? Kari opened her eyes, the core dimming slightly as she looked at him. For a moment, she seemed lost in thought. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but filled with resolve. Because I believe in something greater than myself, she said. I believe that power, true power, should be used to create, not destroy. My people have forgotten that. I couldn't stand by and watch them lose themselves to fear and greed. Stephen nodded, a newfound respect for her settling in his chest. You're braver than I'll ever be. Kari smiled faintly. I think you're braver than you realize. Before Stephen could respond, a faint hum filled the room. The floating orbs around them began to pulse, their lights shifting to a deep red. Kari's expression hardened. They found us. The soft red glow of the warning lights bathed the safe house as a low hum reverberated through the air. Kari's posture tensed, her violet eyes narrowing as she leaped to the console. Her fingers flew across the holographic controls, pulling up a three-dimensional map of the surrounding area. Red markers flickered on the edges, converging rapidly on their location. Stephen scrambled to his feet, heart pounding. What's happening? How did they find us? Kari's voice was sharp and focused. The Sentinels have locked onto the core's energy signature. I shielded it as much as I could, but it appears they've adapted faster than I anticipated. She turned to him, her expression grim but resolute. We have no choice. We must leave now. Stephen swallowed, adrenaline surging through him. What about the plan? The relay? The plan is still in motion, Kari said, scooping up the Genesis core and sliding it into a small containment device that shimmered like liquid glass. But we can't strike from here. We need to reach the relay site before they overwhelm us. A distant crash echoed through the tunnels, followed by the mechanical clatter of approaching Sentinels. Kari grabbed a sleek, metallic weapon from the wall and tossed a smaller device to Stephen. He caught it awkwardly. What's this? A plasma emitter, she said, barely pausing as she adjusted her own weapon. It will defend you. Point and squeeze. Just try not to vaporize yourself. Stephen frowned, eyeing the alien device. Reassuring, Kari didn't respond. She was already moving toward the exit, her movements swift and precise. Stay close to me, she said, her voice firm. And whatever happens, do not let them separate us. The tunnels were a labyrinth of glowing walls and echoing footsteps. Stephen followed Kari closely, the emitter clutched tightly in his hands. His palms were slick with sweat, and his pulse thundered in his ears. The distant sound of the Sentinels grew louder, a relentless chorus of mechanical clicks and whirs. Kari, Stephen hissed as they reached a fork in the tunnel. Which way? She paused briefly, consulting a holographic map projected from her wrist. Left. They veered into the left passage, but before they could get far, the hum of energy weapons filled the air. A trio of Sentinels rounded the corner ahead, their sleek, metallic forms gleaming in the dim light. Their glowing red eyes locked onto the pair, and without hesitation, they raised their weapons. Down! Kari shouted. Stephen dropped just as a burst of energy bolts streaked over his head. Kari returned fire, her weapon emitting sharp, piercing beams of light that sliced through the Sentinel's armor. Sparks flew as one of the machines collapsed, but the remaining two pressed forward, their movements eerily coordinated. Stephen scrambled to his knees, raising the plasma emitter. He squeezed the trigger, and a burst of blue energy shot forth, striking one of the Sentinels square in the chest. The machine staggered, its system sparking wildly before it crumpled to the ground. Not bad, Kari said, a flicker of approval in her voice. Stephen's moment of triumph was short-lived as more Sentinels appeared, their weapons blazing. Kari grabbed his arm, pulling him into a side tunnel. We can't fight them all, she said, her tone urgent. The relay is close. We have to keep moving. The tunnel opened into a vast underground chamber, its ceiling lost in shadow. At the center stood the relay, a towering structure of intertwining metal and glowing conduits. Pulses of red light coursed through it, radiating a low, rhythmic hum. This is it, Kari said, her voice tight with determination. The Overseer's signal comes from here. Stephen stared at the relay, his breath catching. Okay, so, how do we destroy it? Kari pulled a small, spherical device from her belt. It pulsed faintly in her hand. A destabilizer. If I can plant this at the relay's core, it will overload the entire structure. Sounds simple enough, Stephen said, though his tone betrayed his doubt. It won't be, Kari replied grimly. The relay is heavily defended. I'll need you to cover me while I plant the device. Stephen nodded, gripping the plasma emitter tightly. Got it? As they approached the relay, the chamber erupted with motion. Dozens of Sentinels emerged from hidden alcoves, their weapons blazing. Kari darted forward, moving with an almost supernatural grace as she dodged incoming fire. Stephen followed her lead, firing wildly at the advancing machines. His shots weren't always accurate, but they were enough to keep the Sentinels off balance. "Kari," he shouted over the chaos. "How much longer?" "Almost there," she called back, her voice strained. She reached the base of the relay, her fingers flying as she worked to attach the destabilizer. Stephen stood guard, his heart pounding as more Sentinels poured into the chamber. One of the machines lunged at him, its blade-like appendage slicing through the air. Stephen barely managed to dodge, firing a desperate shot that sent the Sentinel sprawling. "Hurry up," he yelled, his voice tinged with panic. With a triumphant cry, Kari stepped back from the relay. "It's done. The destabilizer is active." The relay began to pulse erratically, its red light flickering. A high-pitched whine filled the air, growing louder with each passing second. "Run!" Kari shouted, grabbing Stephen's arm and pulling him toward the exit. The chamber shook violently as the destabilizer did its work. Conduits exploded in showers of sparks, and the Sentinels faltered, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Stephen and Kari sprinted through the tunnels, the sounds of destruction echoing behind them. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and chunks of the ceiling began to collapse. "Keep going," Kari urged, her voice cutting through the chaos. They burst into the open air just as a massive explosion ripped through the ground behind them. A plume of fire and debris shot into the sky, and the shockwave knocked them off their feet. Stephen lay on his back, gasping for breath as the dust settled. Kari was beside him, her chest rising and falling as she stared up at the stars. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Stephen broke the silence. "So, that was fun?" Kari turned her head to look at him, a weary but genuine smile on her face. "You did well, Stephen." He grinned, despite the exhaustion that weighed on him. "Yeah, well, I had a good teacher." As they lay there, the night sky stretching endlessly above them, Stephen felt a strange sense of calm. They had survived. They had fought back. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning.